Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's version of Higher Ground. I'm very excited to have my friend Caitrin Wright joining us. Caitrin is the CEO of Silicon Schools Fund. She has spent more than a dozen years supporting schools throughout Northern California and now across the country. I'm very excited to have her here today. Hi, Caitrin.
Hi, Christina. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, as you know, at Higher Ground, we care a lot about the intersection of talent and the K 12 system, and also try to look at the future of what's happening in K 12. And I think you're the perfect guest for that, given both your orientation towards the future, but also the fact that I know Silicon Schools Fund is always trying to find new opportunities to invest in products and systems and school organizations that are going to really mobilize transformational change for kids. My first question, which is very on brand for Higher Ground, is what do you think the best school leaders consistently get right about building and retaining teams?
I love that question. First of all, thanks, Christina, because I think I certainly agree that what we have always seen in schools is what makes incredible schools is incredible talent. And I think no matter the future of schools and how AI involves, technology involves, who the humans are and what they're doing is the most important design choice that we can make. And how they're led by leaders is the most important thing for us to focus on. I've been reflecting on this a lot with folks around what leadership capabilities folks need to have in the future. And the first thing I'll say is they need all the same ones that they've always had to manage previous change. We saw this with blended learning, where it turned out that the teachers that were just great at running a great classroom or leaders running a great school were also great at running a blended learning classroom or a blended learning school. So I want to pause and first say, I think the basic mechanics of great leadership maintain and sustain no matter what the technological change is, because it's still about building with humans. And I'm curious if that resonates with your experience, Christina, going through so many different changes. It's like the more things change, the more they stay somewhat the same. And then I do have a few thoughts on what else is required. But I think this question of I think the baseline structure feels the same to me.
Yeah, I started 20 years ago. Well, first recruiting teachers briefly, but spending 4 years running the new leaders program, recruiting and hiring and placing leaders or aspiring leaders. And then I've spent, 16 years now doing it outside of new leaders. So I think you're right. The core elements are the same as they were 20 years ago. I think it's harder in some places, in some ways, than it was. And I think that whether it's politics or transformational technology or just what kids are bringing with them to school, hasn't gotten easier. In some places,
Yeah.
it's gotten harder. But I think you're right. Those core elements of do you really believe in kids and do you feel efficacious to do something about changing education and changing life circumstances for kids who need it? Do you believe in adults and working with adults? One of the biggest things I used to ask people when they would come to the New Year's interviews and say, I love kids. And I was like, do you love adults? Because actually, your job is about serving kids, but it's actually about working with adults, right? So I
Right. We're
think you're
all we're
right.
all kids at heart.
We are. So many of those things are the same, ability to look at data, ability to look at trends, ability to mobilize and motivate community, ability to really get down with instruction and understand. So yeah, I think a lot of it's the same, but I am sure there are things that have changed and I don't know what you think of in that way.
Yeah. One of the things that I have noticed, and I'm sure we've all felt, is the rate of change is accelerating. If you think about it was fall of 2023, for example, when Chat GPT came out. And in the last 3 months, the first 3 months of 2026, like 16 different things that have happened are similar to that big breakthrough in 2023. And so I have really noticed that nimbleness and agility and ability to be more emergent in their strategy has become more and more important. I think the fact that technology is exponentially increasing in its capability, whereas we do not have the same capability necessarily to be exponential, but we have to seek to be more exponential in our learning curve and our ability to evolve, or else we run the risk of being outpaced. And I am not a computer scientist, but I have read enough to know to be dangerous in things like how we used to do software development. And I think there's an analogy here, which is we used to do what they call waterfall or sort of sequential software development. And then people realized you actually had to do agile software development, where you had to do a bunch of things in parallel and rapid cycle. And I think we're at a point where what we're going to need from leaders and also for leaders to find in their teams is folks who are more comfortable with that agile emergent strategy work. And at the same time, stay doggedly student focused. I do think sometimes with all of the conversations going around, I spend a lot of time in the questions around how can AI and technology impact learning, to lose the forest for the trees. And we always have to stay focused on like how does this impact students? How does it further their success? And how do we both be rapid prototyping but also follow our North Star, which is results for young people?
And I think what you're alluding to in there also is that the role of the teacher, and look, I sort of laugh because, full transparency, breaking the third wall for those that don't know it, your organization was founded by my husband. You guys worked hand in hand for a dozen years. And I remember, when Brian first started Blow My Learning a dozen years ago in Silicon Schools, it was like, role of teacher will be totally different in flipped classroom. And some of that happened and some of it didn't, right? But where do you see the role of the teacher evolving? I'm not even going to say 5 years, but in the next 3 years, maybe. What does that mean too for how schools should hire and develop talent? Because one of the biggest anxieties I'm hearing from hiring managers and boards and leaders and organizations is, what if I hire someone today that's not going to fit tomorrow? What do you think of for that?
Yeah. And when you say that, Christina, are you thinking more about teachers or more about leaders, which I think have parallels but maybe different?
I guess I was thinking of teachers because I was really thinking about that classroom unit, but I'd
Yeah.
be open to both. I mean, I'm sure both will be different.
Yeah. And I think the wild thing about the time we're in, at least that I feel, is there's the what do we think right now about the next 12 to 24 months? And then what do we think the world will look like in 5 to 10 years? And I feel shaky on my 12 to 24 months and even shakier on my 5 to 10 years. And if someone knows more, then they should really call in
Right.
and do a podcast with you, Christina. The thing that I'm really excited about is that there has been an increasing amount of school models I've seen that have differentiated between the roles that adults can have, that I think brings into play more and more areas of expertise that people could bring and find a home working in schools. I think there's a lot of folks when we think about the people that have influenced us in our lives when we were kids or for our own children or in schools that we've worked with, folks that perhaps weren't the person who knew illustrative math inside and out, but they were incredible at motivating. They were incredible at coaching young people, whether it was on executive function or tricky social situations. And the models that I'm seeing people start, pilot, and plan are creating more avenues for folks to work in schools. And I actually think it will mean that there's always going to be a place for people to deeply know instruction. So I think hiring folks who are incredible at engaging in students and their learning process, I just don't see a world in which we won't desperately need that for our young people because the human connection is so central to motivation, identity, belonging. And I think that we could see there being places for more people to come into schools, for more diverse pipelines of folks to come into schools, and even potentially for there to be places where people could have more modular jobs within schools. We saw in the last few years when virtual tutoring started, I think some of the tutoring folks we were talking to, they were getting 3,000 applications for like 30 tutoring positions because those were virtual, they were online, they were during more condensed hours. And I know, Christina, that's probably not the ratio that you've heard for teacher or leader jobs, right? I mean, and I've heard the converse then as people were hiring for teachers. And
Yeah.
so I actually feel really bullish and optimistic in general if we can all lean into how we can evolve school, that there could be a sort of renaissance of the social impact, social entrepreneurship that in the 2000s, I think there was a bunch of. And I feel that percolating. And I think we have to take advantage of it to bring in incredibly mission and values aligned folks to do the work that we need to do with young people.
Well, and I love that because one of the things Josh and I talk about is that concern about talent pipeline, that teachers are worn out, that traditional teaching, has only gotten harder over the years and also less attractive to young people as they have remote opportunities or hybrid opportunities, or they're prioritizing their personal time and their home life, right? In different ways. And I think that I've thought this too, like, are there ways of trying to rethink or reorganize this work so that we actually could leverage that? So I like your optimism. I think that actually could be really wonderful because it is a concern. I
Hmm.
don't do a lot of teacher hiring myself, of course, these days, but I'm hearing that from teachers, and we're even starting to see it with principals. I will say
Hmm.
our principal pools are harder to build. We're still building them, we're still finding the people, but they're a little more challenging than they were a
Yep.
few years ago, and I worry that it will only become more so. So I think that's a really important thing to think about.
And I will say, when I think about hiring people, I think one of the things I think about is the fact that a lot of the prognoses on what it will take to be successful in the labor market of the future comes back to actually the really important skills of being human, the durable skills, social emotional competence, curiosity, ability to collaborate. And so if I was hiring for the leaders of the future, I would probably be leaning more into those roles or into more into those skills and thinking about how do I test for those, because an awesome instructor in history who doesn't have the flexibility to develop relationships with young people. I think people are already hiring for this, but I think it will be more and more important for us to understand how we could teach kids some of those durable skills. The best teachers we know already do this, right? Like the incredible kindergarten teacher who is teaching phonics, but also teaching kids how to like get along with each other and talk about problems when they have them. Like we've all seen the magic in a bottle teacher who does that. But I think that we will see that being a skill that we need to teach kids more explicitly, honestly, for equity's sake. So all kids have the access to those. So what does it look like to hire teachers that are good at that? We haven't figured out how to do that at scale. And I think it'll be really exciting to figure that out as we go.
It makes me wonder because, Caitrin, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the things that I think is always inspiring about talking with you is you are seeing a lot of the real bright spots in the innovation spots around the country that a lot of us don't get to see every day. What's one or two things that you're seeing that have got you excited for the potential?
Yeah, I'll share two stories on either end of the K to 12 pipeline, if you will. So on one end, there's a great charter organization called Da Vinci that has been doing a lot of amazing work in career connected learning and supporting young people. And one of the things that they've recently innovated is a year 13 program called Life Launch. And I think it was drawn from the belief that our real goal as educators, I actually think also as parents, is to create thriving young people at 25. Like, I care about how my kids do on a test right now, but what I really want is for them to be really happy adults as 25-year-olds. And I think Da Vinci feels the same. And so this idea of how do we create, instead of pushing kids out of the nest, like a slight off ramp, so it's like the degree difficulty dives a little bit easier for everyone to land. And I think the young people involved in that program, what we've heard from them is just the appreciation for that space to do that work. And I think that's a great example of being thoughtful about how do we put what kids need first and then building the programming to use to our advantage and to help young people get to where they need to go. On the flip side, if you think about what you would do if you started it with 5-year-olds and asked, what are they going to need so they can be independent 20 years from now when they're 25? There's a school called Redbridge that I know, Christina, you and I have talked about. In full disclosure, one of my children was part of the founding class there. So I'm very biased, but I also I've eaten at the restaurant, if you will. And I ate there for many years and I'm very happy
Orly is
about it.
wonderful. I knew Orly back when she was at Con Lab School when I
Oh,
worked with
yeah.
them
So Orly
over 10 years
Friedman's the
ago.
founder.
Yeah.
She's an incredible leader. My son who went there in the founding class is now in middle school. And so I've seen a lot of transference. But what Redbridge is focused on is how do you build self-direction in young people so they can tackle important problems that they care about for themselves and their community. And again, that's what I want for my child. Obviously, that's what I want for my child. I chose the school. But then the question is, what do you have to start doing in order to make that true? And so they're an example where they have some differentiated roles for teachers. So there is a teacher who is a sort of an autonomy level guide. They group kids according to how able they are to pursue their own work over the course of a day or a week. And then they have content instructionally focused folks. So you may have one person, this incredible magical unicorn of a kindergarten teacher, and I'm picturing her because she's amazing at Redbridge, who is so good at teaching kids how to think about like, what's a just right goal for me? How can I make friends with my line partner when I'm walking to the playground? And she's able to build this culture with these young kids. And then they go off to another teacher who's focused on just that exact right space for their math or for their reading. And I think what I saw from there is twofold. One, a group of adults who are really able to be expert in a more prescribed role, which I think can make things more sustainable, although those teachers are working incredibly hard. And two, Brian, as you mentioned, Christina's husband, Brian, and I worked together a long time. And he always had this analogy of, who's rowing the boat. And when educators are rowing the boat, like there's a lot of kids in there, the educators are pulling really hard. And what would happen if the kids pick up the oars and start rowing? And I think at Redbridge, you start to see when kids pick up the oars, they row and they row. And then what I've seen with my own child is like he left that school but kept rowing. I asked him at middle school, why has it been relatively easy for you to transition? And he left Redbridge in third grade. And he looked at me and goes, I learned it at Redbridge. I was like, okay, like that's what you want in a school. You want transference of skills. And so I'm really hopeful about what we can do with our youngest learners, our oldest learners, and everything in between. I could go on and on, but I'll stop. I think there's a lot of things to be excited about.
I think that's great. And again, it gives us a lot of optimism. What's one assumption about innovation or innovative schools that you think doesn't hold up or that we get wrong?
I think when we think innovative schools, first of all, I like to ask like innovative towards what end? Because we always have to be mindful that we're not actually innovation is a means to an end, not an end in
Really?
itself. And then two, being an innovative school doesn't mean you have to create everything from scratch and that none of the things that we've ever known about learning still hold, right? So I think about Navigator Schools, which is a really, really innovative and high quality charter network. And they would be doing these very innovative practices and then doing really, really traditional reading mastery, phonics, small group instruction, because that's what worked for their kids. And so let us not recreate the wheel. The wheel actually works quite well. Like, let's redesign the chassis, but like, let's hold on to some of those things that work. And I think that can be hard because we're all trying for coherence and integration. But if we recreate everything, we actually won't do any of it particularly well.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to wrap up our conversation. I know you've got to get on with your day. I really appreciate your time. What's something people may not know about Silicon Schools Fund that they should know?
Two things, maybe. One, I think we are a small team by intention. And I think that is important because so much of the work is about how do we find ways to bring expertise through others, through other experts, to the folks that we work with. And two, uh, we believe that breaking bread with each other is important. And I think that like this question, like how do we always be in person and connected to each other, is something I value in all organizations. So we joke here, never have sad desk lunch. Don't sit at your desk and eat lunch. Like that is branded sad desk lunch. You better come sit down and eat with each other. And I joke about that, but I think there's something about how do we always all strive for connection with each other? And how do you find ways to work with small groups of people that you're deeply aligned with to do important things? And that's been so motivating for me. And I think what's kept our team so invigorated by the work and so excited about working with schools.
Well, thank you, Caitrin. Anything else that you want the broader community to know about what you're up to before we wrap up?
Well, I have tenacious, voracious curiosity. So if you're building something interesting that you're excited about, whether it's vibe coding, whether it's a school, my big mantra is I will get on a plane to come and see anything in person before I get on a plane to hear people talk about things.
And she does. Like, listen to this. I've seen Caitrin many a time where she's like, I spent 24 hours on the ground at this really cool place.
So I love getting to do school visits, seeing the work in person. And I think there's so many embers we should be flaming. So if you have an ember or a school or an idea that you are fanning the flame of, I'd love to be in touch.
Thanks so much, Caitrin. Thanks for joining us on Higher Ground. Thanks for your time. And thanks for all the work that you're doing at Silicon Schools to look to the next generation of what's going to happen for our kids.
Thank you, Christina.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.